I've always had a thing for things that should be dead. My name is David, and for the last 3.5 years, I've spent my nights in a cramped basement workshop in Columbus, Ohio, breathing life back into discarded history. I'm an antique restoration hobbyist. There's something meditative about stripping away 80 years of rust and grime to find the gleaming soul of a machine underneath. Most people my age are out at bars on Friday nights. I'm usually hunched over a workbench with a soldering iron and a bottle of isopropyl alcohol. I live alone in a rental, a small, drafty house built in the late 1942. It has those thin walls that let you hear the house settling, the wood groaning under its own weight. It's the kind of place that's quiet, too quiet if you don't have a project to keep your mind occupied. 3 weeks ago, I hit what I thought was the jackpot. I was scouting an estate sale in a wealthy part of town, the kind of place where the air smells like mothballs and old money. In the corner of a damp garage, I found it. A 1938 Zenith floor model radio. It was a shutter dial model, a massive piece of walnut cabinetry that stood nearly 4 feet tall. The wood was scratched, and the grill cloth was torn, but the glass dial was pristine. The guy running the sale practically begged me to take it. He told me it had belonged to his grandfather, who had recently passed away in the house. He sold it to me for $40. If you know anything about vintage electronics, you know that's a steal. A Zenith in that condition usually goes for 10 times that amount. Just a heads up, the guy said as we loaded the 70-pound beast into my trunk. Gramps used to talk to that thing. My mother said he refused to ever turn it off, even at the end. I laughed it off. Old people get attached to their routines. I figured it was just a lonely man seeking some background noise. When I got it home, I hauled it down to my basement. The air down there is always a few degrees cooler than the rest of the house, smelling of damp concrete and motor oil. I cleared a spot for the Zenith right under the flickering fluorescent light. As I ran my hand over the rough, unpolished wood, a strange sensation prickled at the back of my neck. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was just a weight. The room felt smaller with the radio in it. I grabbed my screwdriver set and sat down on my stool, ready to dig into the guts of the machine. I wanted to see what was inside. I wanted to hear it sing. Looking back, I should have just left it in that garage. Some things are buried for a reason. The first thing I did was pull the back panel off to inspect the chassis. I expected to find a graveyard of desiccated spiders and frayed, crumbly wiring. Instead, the interior of the Zenith was unnervingly clean. The glass vacuum tubes were free of dust, standing like small, transparent monuments in the dim light of my workshop. It was 11:14 p.m. when I decided to give it power. Usually, you're supposed to use a variable transformer, a variac, to slowly introduce voltage to these old sets so you don't blow the original capacitors. But a strange, impatient impulse took hold of me. I reached for the heavy, cloth-wrapped power cord and plugged it directly into the wall outlet. The reaction was instantaneous. Normally, these old tube radios take 30 to 45 seconds to warm up. You wait for the filaments to glow orange before you hear so much as a hum. But the moment the prongs hit the socket, the amber pilot light behind the shutter dial snapped to life. It didn't flicker. It burned with a steady, intense luminescence that seemed to cast long, distorted shadows of my tools against the basement walls. Then came the sound. It wasn't the crackle of a warm-up or the pop of a failing resistor. It was a low, rhythmic pulsing. Hoopah, hoopah. It was thick and heavy, vibrating through the floor of the workshop and up into the soles of my boots. My chest felt tight, my own heart trying to sync up with the mechanical rhythm. Static, I whispered to the empty room, though my voice sounded thin. I reached for the heavy brass tuning knob. The gears turned with a buttery smoothness that felt almost lubricated, which was impossible for a machine that had supposedly been sitting in a garage for decades. As I swept the needle across the AM band, I didn't hit a single station. No local news, no late-night talk shows, no sports broadcasts, just that breathing static. I stopped at 1,120 kilohertzes. The pulsing grew louder, more intentional. I leaned my ear closer to the tattered speaker cloth. Beneath the white noise, there was a secondary sound, a faint, metallic scraping, like a needle being dragged across a slate floor. I felt a sudden, sharp chill. I reached out to touch the wooden cabinet, and the vibration was so intense it made my teeth ache. Then, the static broke for a fraction of a second. I caught the tail end of a melody, 3 notes played on a high-pitched organ before the rhythmic breathing swallowed it whole again. Just interference, I muttered, wiping a bead of cold sweat from my upper lip. Just picking up a ghost signal from a cell tower or something. I reached back and yanked the plug out of the wall. The amber light died instantly, and the basement plunged into a silence so absolute it made my ears ring. I stood there in the dark for a long minute, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the edge of my workbench. I told myself it was just the excitement of a new project. I told myself the wiring was just better than I'd hoped. But as I walked upstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that the radio wasn't waiting for a signal. It was waiting for me. I didn't touch the radio for 3 days. I told myself I was busy with work, but the truth was, every time I looked at the basement door, I felt a heavy, leaden ball of dread settle in my stomach. However, by Tuesday night, the rational part of my brain had won. Logic dictated that a wooden box couldn't be malicious. I went back down at 10:30 p.m. The basement felt colder than usual, the air carrying a sharp, metallic tang that set my teeth on edge. I sat back down on my stool, determined to finish cleaning the exterior. I didn't even plug it in this time, I just wanted to work on the woodwork. I was halfway through scrubbing a stubborn wax buildup on the side panel when the dial light flickered. It was faint at first, a dim, sickly orange glow behind the glass. I froze, my rag mid-stroke. I looked at the power cord. It was coiled on the floor, 3 feet away from the outlet. My heart gave a violent thud against my ribs. "Okay," I whispered, my breath hitching. "Residual charge. Capacitors holding power. That's all." Then the speakers crackled. It was a dry, papery sound, like dead leaves blowing across a sidewalk. Slowly, the tuning needle began to move. It didn't jump. It drifted with a steady mechanical precision, gliding from the high end of the band down toward the center. It stopped exactly at 1,120 kilohertzes. The static returned, but it was different now. It was sharper, more organized. Through the haze of white noise, I heard a voice. It was distant, buried under layers of electronic filth, but the cadence was unmistakable. It sounded like a news announcer from the 1,940 seconds, that fast, clipped, mid-Atlantic accent. I leaned in, my curiosity momentarily overriding my terror. I could make out snippets of words. Unprecedented. Heavy rainfall. The bridge collapse on 5th Street. Total casualties estimated at 14. I frowned. 5th Street was only 4 blocks from my house. I'd driven over that bridge on my way home from work an hour ago. It was fine, and it hadn't rained in a week. I reached out and tapped the glass dial. "Who is this?" The broadcast cut out instantly. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick enough to taste. Then, a new sound emerged from the speakers. It wasn't the announcer. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It took me 5 seconds to realize the rhythm matched the tapping of my own nervous fingers on the workbench. I pulled my hand away, as if the wood had turned into red-hot iron. My legs felt like water as I backed away. My eyes locked on the amber glow of the dial. I checked the cord again. Still unplugged. But as I watched, the amber light grew brighter, pulsating in time with my own frantic breathing. I wasn't just listening to the radio anymore. It was listening to me. I should have left the house right then. I should have packed a bag, thrown the keys on the counter, and driven until I hit the state line. But obsession is a funny thing. It overrides survival instincts. It masquerades as curiosity right up until it kills you. I didn't sleep that night. By Friday morning, I had convinced myself that there was a logical explanation. A hidden battery pack. A capacitor with an incredible charge hold. A prank by the estate sale guy involving a Bluetooth receiver hidden inside the chassis. I needed to prove it was a trick. If I could prove it was a trick, I wasn't crazy. It was 2:14 a.m. on Saturday when I went back downstairs. I brought my full toolkit this time. The plan was simple. Dismantle the radio completely. Strip it down to the frame until I found the power source. The basement was dead silent. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I just used the focused beam of my headlamp. It carved a cone of white light through the darkness, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The zenith sat in the corner, dark and dormant. I sat on the stool and leaned in close. "All right," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Let's see what you're hiding." I reached for a Phillips head screwdriver. The back panel was held on by 4 rusted screws. I jammed the tip into the first screw head and twisted. It wouldn't budge. I grunted, applying more pressure, the metal of the tool digging into my palm. Click. The sound came from inside the radio. It wasn't the switch. It was the sound of a throat clearing. I froze. My headlamp beam was fixed on the screw, but my peripheral vision caught the amber glow rising again. The dial lit up, casting that sickly yellow light onto my hands. The radio was unplugged. The cord was draped over my shoulder, the plug resting on my chest. A low hum filled the room, vibrating the workbench. It wasn't static this time. It was a carrier wave. Pure, absolute silence that felt louder than noise. The pressure in the room dropped. My ears popped. Then the voice spoke. It didn't sound like a recording. It didn't sound like a broadcast from 1938. It was crisp, sharp, and terrified me because it sounded like it was standing right next to my ear. "David," the voice said. It was a man's voice, cultured, with that transatlantic lilt, but laced with a condescending amusement. "You're using the wrong screwdriver. Those are flatheads." My hand went numb. The screwdriver slipped from my grip and clattered onto the concrete floor, the sound exploding like a gunshot in the quiet basement. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I stared at the screw head. It was right. It was a slotted screw, not a Phillips. The radio wasn't just playing audio. It wasn't just picking up signals. It was watching me. "Don't look so pale, David," the voice purred, the amber light pulsing in time with the syllables. "It's rude to ignore a guest." I scrambled backward, kicking the stool over. I hit the floor hard, scrambling on my hands and knees toward the stairs, gasping for air that suddenly tasted like ozone and rotting flowers. Panic has a way of turning into a cold, manic logic if you give it enough time. I didn't leave the house. Instead, I spent the next hour tearing it apart. My brain refused to accept ghosts. It had to be a hack. Someone had planted a two-way speaker in the chassis. Someone had access to my Wi-Fi. Someone was watching me through a pinhole camera hidden in the rafters. It was an elaborate, sick prank. I marched to the utility closet and killed the main breaker. The house groaned as the refrigerator compressor died and the HVAC system wound down. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against my ears. Next, I took my phone and locked it in the glove box of my car outside. I wanted zero electronic footprint. If this thing was transmitting, I was going to cut its throat. I went back down to the basement. It was pitch black, save for the beam of my heavy-duty mag light. I swept the light over the shelves, the corners, the exposed insulation in the ceiling. I looked for the glint of a lens, the blink of an LED. Nothing. The zenith sat in the dark, a hulking shadow against the wall. It was completely dead. No amber light. No hum. "All right," I said, my voice echoing too loudly in the dead house. "The power is out. The internet is down. So if you're real, talk now." I waited. 10 seconds. 20. I began to feel a rush of relief. It was a trick. Without power, the receiver couldn't work. I had won. I let out a shaky breath and lowered the flashlight. Click. The amber dial light flared to life, brighter than before, illuminating the dust motes swirling in the stagnant air. The main breaker was off. The plug was on the floor. The laws of physics say this is impossible. The speaker didn't crackle this time. The audio was studio quality clear. "You're very thorough, David," the voice said. "But you can't disconnect us. We aren't on the grid." I stood my ground, though my knees were shaking so hard I had to lean against the washing machine. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" "I know a lot of things," the voice drawled. It sounded amused, like a cat toying with a half-dead mouse. "I know you're afraid. I know you check the locks 3 times before bed. I know about the box you buried under the oak tree when you were 7. The blood drained from my face. I felt dizzy. The cigar box." The voice continued, its tone dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, with the sparrow inside. "You found it injured, didn't you? You tried to fix it, but you squeezed too hard. You didn't tell your mother you killed it, you just buried it." I couldn't speak. My mouth tasted like copper. I had never told anyone that. Not a soul. It wasn't on the internet. It wasn't in a database. It was a memory locked in the deepest, darkest part of my brain. "I didn't mean to," I whispered, the confession tumbling out before I could stop it. "I know," the voice soothed, but the static underneath it sounded like sharpening knives. "That's why we like you, David. You try to fix broken things, but some things stay broken." The light behind the dial pulsed red for a split second, then returned to amber. The air in the basement suddenly dropped 20 degrees. I could see my breath pluming in the flashlight beam. This wasn't a hacker. This wasn't a prank. The radio wasn't receiving a signal from the outside. It was remembering me. The air in the basement changed first. It didn't just get cold, it got heavy, developing a texture that coated the back of my throat. It started as the sharp electric tang of ozone, the smell of a thunderstorm about to break, but underneath it was something sweet and cloying. Rotting lilacs. It smelled like a funeral home that had lost power in the middle of July. I gagged, covering my nose with the sleeve of my flannel shirt. The flashlight beam in my hand was shaking so violently that the shadows of the shelves danced like seizures on the walls. "You don't like the perfume, David?" the voice asked. The tone had shifted. The polite, informative cadence was gone, replaced by a sneering, theatrical quality. It sounded like a ringmaster introducing a circus freak. "It's a family recipe. A little bit of voltage, a little bit of decay." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I spun around, aiming for the stairs, my boots slipping slightly on the smooth concrete floor. "And he turns to run!" the voice boomed, projecting from the speakers with impossible volume. It was narrating me. David, 28, single, terrified, makes a break for the exit. Look at his heart rate, folks. It's fluttering like a trapped moth. 140. 150. He thinks he's gonna have a stroke right here on the floor. I froze, my hand hovering inches from the banister. The accuracy was visceral. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm that made my vision blur. "Stop it," I rasped, my voice sounding small and pathetic in the echoing room. "Oh, but we're just getting to the good part," the radio crackled. "The part where the denial breaks. Look at his hands, listeners. Look at the sweat dripping from his chin. He's tasting bile, aren't you, David? That sour, yellow taste of pure panic." I involuntarily swallowed. He was right. The acidic burn of vomit was rising in my throat. I turned back to face the radio, compelled by a horrified instinct I couldn't control. The amber light was the only steady thing in the world. It seemed to expand, filling my peripheral vision. "What do you want?" I screamed, the sound tearing at my throat. The static swelled, sounding like a crowd applauding in the distance. "Want? We don't want anything, David. We're simply broadcasting. And you." The voice dropped an octave, a smooth announcer veneer cracking to reveal something ancient and wet underneath. "You are the program. You are the tragedy of the week. And the ratings are going to be spectacular." A wave of dizziness hit me. The smell of the lilacs intensified, becoming so thick I felt like I was drowning in flowers. I wasn't just in my basement anymore. I was on a stage, and the audience was hiding in the dark, waiting for the main act to bleed. Terror has a breaking point. Eventually, the adrenaline floods your system so thoroughly that fear turns into a frantic, violent need for action. I couldn't listen to that voice narrate my own breakdown for 1 second longer. "Shut up!" I screamed, the sound raw and tearing at my vocal cords. I lunged at the zenith. I didn't care about preserving history anymore. I wanted this thing out of my house. I wanted it in the dumpster. I wanted it gone. I grabbed the walnut sides of the cabinet, intending to tip it backward onto my hand truck. It should have weighed about 70 pounds heavy, but manageable for a grown man. I planted my feet and heaved. It didn't budge. It wasn't just heavy. It felt like it was bolted to the bedrock beneath the foundation. I strained until the veins in my neck bulged, my boots screeching against the concrete floor, but the radio remained perfectly, impossibly still. It felt dense, like I was trying to push a black hole wrapped in wood. The wood itself was wrong. It didn't feel like room temperature timber. It was freezing so cold it burned my palms, like touching dry ice. The cold seemed to seep into my wrists, traveling up my forearms, numbing my nerves. "Oh, David," the voice chuckled, the sound crisp and clear despite the fact that I had just seen the speaker cone vibrate. "You can't move the furniture while the show is on air. That's against studio regulations." I let go, gasping, shaking my hands to get the feeling back. I looked around wildly for a weapon. My eyes landed on the heavy pipe wrench on my workbench. I grabbed it. "If I can't move you, I'll kill you," I hissed. I swung the wrench with everything I had, aiming directly for the glass shutter dial. Crack. The sound was sickening, like a bat hitting a skull. The glass shattered, raining shards down onto the carpet. I swung again, smashing the wooden ribs of the speaker grill. I drove the metal jaw of the wrench into the paper cone of the speaker, tearing it to shreds. I destroyed the physical mechanism of the voice. I stood back, heaving, my chest heaving, waiting for the silence. But the amber light didn't fade. It glowed brighter, illuminating the jagged teeth of the broken glass. And then, from the ruined, shredded remains of the speaker, the voice spoke again. It wasn't distorted. It wasn't broken. It was louder. Temper. Temper, the announcer chided. The sound wasn't coming from the speaker cone anymore. It was coming from the air itself, vibrating the dust, resonating in the hollows of my own skull. Breaking the receiver doesn't stop the signal, David. It just lets it out. The amber light began to pulse faster, shifting into a deep, bloody crimson. The shadows in the corners of the basement stretched, detaching themselves from the walls. "We aren't finished yet, David," the voice whispered. And for the first time, all the amusement was gone. "We haven't even started the main event." I didn't wait to see what the shadows were doing. I scrambled up the wooden stairs on my hands and knees, my fingernails digging into the unvarnished pine treads. I hit the door at the top with my shoulder, bursting into the kitchen, and slammed it shut behind me. I didn't just lock the deadbolt. I grabbed one of the heavy oak dining chairs and jammed it under the doorknob. It was a useless gesture. I knew that. You can't lock out a frequency. But the lizard brain demands a barrier. I didn't stop there. I sprinted through the darkened living room, taking the stairs to the second floor 2 at a time. I ran into my bedroom, locked that door too, and backed into the farthest corner of the room, sliding down the wall until I hit the floor. I sat there in the dark, clutching my knees, staring at the digital clock on my nightstand. It read 2:38 a.m. The red numbers seemed to float in the blackness. For a moment, there was silence. Just the ragged sound of my own breathing and the blood rushing in my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to force myself to wake up. "This is a stress dream," I told myself. "You fell asleep at the workbench. You inhaled too many fumes from the varnish stripper." Then, the floorboards beneath me began to vibrate. It started as a subtle buzz, like a heavy truck idling outside, but it quickly ramped up into a violent shudder. The loose change on my dresser rattled. The picture frames on the wall tilted. Downstairs, inside the sealed basement, the radio was screaming. It wasn't broadcasting words yet. It was pure white noise, but amplified to a level that shouldn't have been possible for a set of blown-out speakers. It was loud enough to vibrate the structural beams of the house. I could hear the glass in the kitchen windows rattling in their frames. Then, I heard the click-clack of the volume knob being turned. It was an impossible sound to hear over the static, but it cut through clearly. The mechanical ratcheting of the dial being forced past its maximum limit. The static cut out instantly. The silence that followed was heavier than before. It felt pressurized. I held my breath. My eyes locked on the metal heating vent screwed into the floor near the door. The ductwork connected the entire house like a metal throat. "Oh, David," the voice sang. It came directly from the vent. It echoed through the aluminum ducts, gaining a hollow metallic quality that made it sound like it was coming from inside a tin can. "You can't hide upstairs, David," heat rises. And so do we. I watched in horror as the little metal lever on the vent register began to move. Slowly, deliberately, it slid from closed to open. A puff of that same cold, rotting lilac air hissed into the room. "Come back down," the voice cooed, the tone shifting from playful to commanding. The audience is waiting for the finale. And you know what they say. If you don't go to the show comes to you. I stopped breathing. I literally stopped. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle even the sound of an exhale, my eyes fixed on the gap beneath my bedroom door. The hallway light was off, leaving just a sliver of darkness against the darkness of my room. The voice in the vent had fallen silent. The static was gone. Then, a new sound began to emanate from the ductwork. It wasn't speech. It was a rhythmic, dull thudding. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like a recording of someone walking in heavy boots on a hardwood floor. It was crisp, high-fidelity audio, echoing slightly in the metal tin of the ventilation system. And then I felt it. A split second after each sound played through the vents, the floorboards of my room vibrated. Thump from the vents, followed immediately by a physical shudder traveling up the frame of the house. My stomach dropped. The radio wasn't just playing a recording. It was broadcasting a live feed of something moving through my living room. I listened, paralyzed, as the footsteps reached the bottom of the staircase. I know my house. I know every groan and settle of the timber. I know that the third step has a high-pitched whine, and the seventh step sounds like a cracking knuckle. The radio broadcast the whine. Creak. A half-second later, from the other side of my bedroom door, I heard the actual physical staircase scream under a massive weight. It was ascending. My mind raced, trying to find a jagged edge of logic to hold on to. Was it an intruder? A burglar who had broken in while I was in the basement? But burglars don't sync up with a haunted radio frequency. Burglars don't make the air smell like copper and grave dirt. The footsteps were slow, deliberate. They were the steps of something that knew I had nowhere to go. They hit the landing outside my room. The floorboards in the hallway groaned, bowing under a pressure that shouldn't have been possible. The sound from the vent changed. It shifted from footsteps to a wet, heavy breathing. I scrambled backward until my spine hit the cold plaster of the wall. I grabbed the nearest heavy object, a brass lamp from my nightstand, and held it like a club, the cord dangling uselessly. The presence stopped directly in front of my door. I could see the shadow in the gap underneath block out the faint ambient light from the hallway window. The shadow didn't look like feet. It looked like a pool of black liquid spreading across the floor. From the vents, the radio spoke one word, whispered with terrifying clarity. Knock. And then, 3 violent, thunderous blows hammered against my bedroom door. Boom. 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 The wood of the door frame splintered. The chair I had jammed under the knob skittered across the floor an inch. Plaster dust rained down from the ceiling. It wasn't a request for entry. It was a demonstration of force. The thing outside wasn't bound by the radio anymore. It was here. The wood around the strike plate of my bedroom door cracked with a sound like a pistol shot. A long, jagged fissure appeared in the white paint, running from the knob to the hinge. The thing on the other side hit it again, harder this time, and the heavy oak chair I jammed under the handle skidded another 3 inches across the hardwood floor with a harsh screech. I didn't wait for the third knock. I spun around and scrambled for the window. It was a double-hung sash, painted shut by the previous landlord, but adrenaline is a hell of a drug. I slammed the heels of my hands against the upper frame, breaking the paint seal with a sharp crack, and shoved the window upward. The night air rushed in, cold, clean, and smelling of damp grass. It was a stark, beautiful contrast to the suffocating stench of ozone and rotting flowers filling my room. I looked down. It was a 12-foot drop to the hydrangeas below. I'd probably sprain an ankle, maybe break a wrist, but I would be out. I grabbed my car keys from the dresser. My hand was shaking so badly the keychain rattled like a tambourine. I threw one leg over the sill, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Don't be rash, David," the voice spoke. It came from the floor vent again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't the crisp announcer voice. It was garbled, low, mixed with the sound of wind rushing past a microphone. I froze, straddling the windowsill. From the ductwork, a new soundscape emerged. It was the distinct, rhythmic chug-chug-chug of a starter motor struggling to turn over. I knew that sound. It was the starter on my 2014 Civic. It had a specific delay, a specific whine. Then, the engine caught. I heard the idle settle into that familiar, slightly rough purr. I've had a loose heat shield on the catalytic converter for 2 years. It rattles when the car is cold. The radio was broadcasting the sound of my car, starting in my driveway. "I locked the keys in the car," I whispered, panic tightening my chest. "I have this spare. It can't be starting." The broadcast shifted. I heard the crunch of gravel as the car accelerated, then the squeal of tires on asphalt. The engine roared, the RPMs climbing higher and higher, straining the transmission. "No," I breathed, pulling my leg back inside, unable to look away from the vent. The sound was deafening now. The roar of the engine, the wind noise, and then skreek. Crunch. It wasn't a Hollywood crash sound. It was wet and dense. It was the sound of metal folding like wet cardboard, the explosion of safety glass, and the sickening, sudden silence of an engine killed mid-stroke. Then came the screaming. It was me. There was no doubt. It wasn't a generic scream. It was my voice, pitched up in absolute agony, bubbling through blood. I heard the sound of someone choking, gasping for air through a crushed windpipe. "Help me," the radio voice version of me gurgled. "Oh God, my legs. I can't feel my legs." I stood there by the window, tears streaming down my face, gripping the sill until my knuckles turned white. The door behind me had stopped shuddering. The pounding had ceased. "You can leave, David," the announcer's voice returned, smooth and silky, cutting through the audio of my dying breaths. "The door is open, the window is up, but we broadcast the news before it happens. Do you really want to test the accuracy of our reporting?" I looked at the keys in my hand. Then I looked at the drop to the driveway. I pulled the window shut and locked it. I wasn't leaving. It wouldn't let me die outside. It wanted me here. I realized then that fear acts like a fuel gauge. You burn through it until the tank is empty, and what's left in the engine is just a cold, gritty residue of rage. I wasn't going to jump out a window. I wasn't going to die in a car crash that hadn't happened yet. I unlocked my bedroom door. The hallway was empty. The oppressive presence that had hammered against the wood moments ago had retreated, sucking back into the shadows like a receding tide. The silence was absolute, but the smell, that cloying, funeral home scent of lilacs, was so thick I could taste it on the back of my tongue. I walked down the stairs. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through waist-deep water, but I didn't stop. I went straight to the utility closet off the kitchen and grabbed the 3-pound sledgehammer I used for demolition work. The hickory handle felt solid and grounding in my grip. I kicked the basement door open. The darkness down there was alive. It swirled and eddied like smoke, and sitting in the corner, illuminated by its own internal light, was the zenith. It was whole. That was the moment my stomach truly dropped. I had smashed the glass. I had torn the speaker cone to ribbons. I had hammered the chassis until the wood splintered, but there it stood pristine. The walnut cabinet shone with a fresh coat of wax. The intricate grill cloth was taut and unblemished. The glass shutter dial was perfect, glowing with that hateful, steady amber light. It hadn't just survived, it had reset the stage. As I stepped onto the concrete floor, the radio began to scream. It wasn't the announcer's voice anymore. It was a cacophony of sound that hit me like a physical blow. It was the sound of bones snapping, of metal tearing, of every moment of physical pain I had ever experienced looped and layered over itself. I heard the snap of my wrist from when I was 12. I heard the wheezing gasp of my pneumonia from 3 years ago. "You want a show?" I roared over the noise, gripping the sledgehammer with both hands. "I'll give you a finale." I marched across the room. The air temperature plummeted with every step. Hoarfrost bloomed on the metal of my workbench. My breath came out in jagged white clouds. I raised the hammer. The amber light flared brighter, blindingly intense, turning the basement into a washed-out photograph of yellow and black. As I began my downswing, my eyes locked onto the glass dial one last time. The curved glass acted like a mirror in the dark room. I saw my own reflection, pale, wild-eyed, terrifying. But I saw something else. Standing directly behind me, towering over my left shoulder, was a figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, wearing a suit that looked like it was made of static, but it had no face. Where the features should have been, there was just a gaping, dark speaker cone, vibrating with the sound of my own screaming. I didn't stop the swing. I couldn't. "Checkmate," the radio whispered, right before the hammer made contact. Crash. The impact didn't feel like hitting glass and wood. It felt like hitting a wall of solid electricity. A shockwave blasted up my arms, blowing the hammer out of my grip. The bulb in the overhead fixture exploded. The amber light vanished. And then, total, crushing darkness took me. I woke up to the smell of burnt hair and ozone. I was lying on the cold concrete floor of the basement, my ears ringing with a high-pitched whine that hasn't stopped to this day. The flashlight was rolling on the floor, its beam flickering weakly against the far wall. I sat up, my head pounding, and looked at the corner. The zenith was gone. Well, not gone, destroyed. This time, there was no magical reset. There was just a pile of splintered walnut veneer, shattered glass, and crushed vacuum tubes that glittered like diamond dust in the dim light. I had reduced it to kindling. The copper wiring was snarled and black, as if it had been subjected to a massive electrical surge. I didn't celebrate. I didn't check for salvageable parts. I didn't even go upstairs to pack a bag. I stood up, walked out of the basement, got into my car, and drove. I drove for 14 hours straight, until I ran out of gas somewhere in Nebraska. I left my clothes, my furniture, and my deposit. I left the life I had built in Columbus behind, like a shed skin. That was 2 months and 4 days ago. I live in Denver now. My apartment is in a sterile, modern complex built last year. Everything is white, sharp-edged, and soulless. There are no antiques here, no old wood, no tube electronics. I don't own a radio. I don't even have a TV. For the first few weeks, I thought I was clear. I thought that smashing the receiver had killed the signal, but last Tuesday, the heat wave hit. My AC unit broke down, and the maintenance guy couldn't come until the morning. Desperate for relief, I went to the store and bought a cheap plastic box fan. I set it up on the floor of my bedroom and turned it on high. The blades spun up, creating that familiar, droning whoosh of white noise. I laid back on my bed, closing my eyes, finally starting to relax. And then I heard it. Buried deep in the oscillation of the fan blades, woven into the wind noise, was a rhythm. Hoo-pa, hoo-pa. I sat up, my blood turning to ice. I stared at the plastic grate of the fan, and now the voice whispered faint, distorted, but unmistakably him. We returned to our regularly scheduled programming. It wasn't the radio. It never was the radio. The radio was just a door. The signal is everywhere. It's in the hum of the refrigerator. It's in the static between tracks on a playlist. It's in the rushing wind on the highway. I unplugged the fan. The room went silent, but I know it's only a matter of time. I can feel the pressure building in my ears again. I can smell the lilacs. I'm writing this because I need you to know one thing. If you ever find an old radio and it turns on before you plug it in, don't touch the dial. Don't try to find the station, because once they know you're listening, they never stop broadcasting. And I think I know that on the next episode,